My name is Katarzyna Stoklosa, together with my colleague Gerhard Besier from the University of Dresden. I'm from the University of Southern Denmark, Sønderborg, in the German-Danish border region. We tried to invite other scholars to write a book together about the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, about the development of the Russian conflict after incorporation of Crimea and the perception of this conflict in different European countries. Perception of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict has been very different in countries that are a direct neighbor of Russia and of Ukraine. Perceived the Ukrainian-Russian conflict completely different from countries that are not a direct neighbor of Russia and Ukraine, like Germany or France or Northern European countries, countries that have Ukraine and Russia as neighbors have been very much afraid because of the Ukrainian-Russian war. Why? They thought that something similar could happen in their countries, in the countries of all. In the Baltic countries, the fear was very big that Russia will incorporate Baltic countries or part of them too. It wasn't such a problem in Poland, although Poland tried to play with these fears too and presented Russia as a big enemy. Will try to incorporate part of Poland too, but it wasn't such a realistic scenario as for Baltic countries because of the Soviet past. Nevertheless, it was a Polish interpretation of the conflict, interpretation in the new Polish government, conservative government. This is what we wanted to present, different versions, different perceptions of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict.
Yeah, that what Katarzyna told you is not only true for the Baltic states, but for example Finland too, as the contributor told in this book. Finnish people are afraid of similar handling. They are thinking about former civilization, this period until the breakdown of the Soviet empire. And so there are fears, and the measurement is how far are the countries from Russia. As she mentioned, in Germany, we do not have sorrows that the Red Army will come and fight against Germans. That would be ridiculous. Nobody believes in this scene. But that's different to those countries that are situated very close to Russia.
Although we have to say that Finland reacted very differently from that, and this is perhaps a proof that reactions, perceptions can be different even in countries that are direct Russian neighbor. Finland has reacted in a more diplomatic way. Cautious, diplomatic. Yeah. It's very typical for Finland, and didn't want to react in an aggressive way to Russia, and didn't want to have a very clear opinion, pro-Ukrainian opinion. Finland preferred to be cautious and to wait how the situation will develop. whilst Poland reacted in a more categorical way, in a more decisive way, and reacted against Russia and started to support Ukraine and started to criticize other countries, above all Germany, that Germany didn't want to take a clear, didn't want to support Ukraine and reacted pro-Russian. Poland called Germany Russian sympathizers and accused Germany to not to support a peace process between Ukraine and Russia. This is an example that the Ukrainian conflict hasn't been on a Ukrainian-Russian conflict, but it was a cause for divisions inside of Europe. And because of the Ukrainian conflict, Europe became divided. We could see division between Eastern European countries and Western European countries regarding the reactions towards the Ukrainian-Russian war.
We looked for sources in the archives as well as scholarly books, but also the media. So it's a multi-sources, a multi-sourced book. And I think that's important because the conflict is not long ago. It takes place until today. So we need new informations. Moreover, this conflict seemed to be a conflict between Western values and norms and Eastern ones. That's what we wanted to make clear too. Sometimes these values are instrumentalized for political reasons. That's quite clear. That's true for religious too. But there are differences in the notion of strong leaders, for example, or the notion of a democratic functioning state and something like that.
In order to understand these different pictures, perceptions, and in people's mind, we used, not only archive sources from foreign ministries, not only media from different countries, but we use interviews with people too, above all from Russia, from Ukraine, and other countries, in order to know how do ordinary people perceive the conflict, how do they see and interpret the situation. It was important above all for Ukraine and Russia in order to understand the vision, the standpoints, why so many Eastern Ukrainians supported, we can say, incorporation of Crimea. This was one of the results. We can say that very many people supported incorporation of Crimea. We wanted to understand this. And the result of the interviews was that very many Ukrainians don't know Western European world, don't know European Union. They only know Russia. They only know Russian neighbor and Putin. And they don't trust European Union. They don't trust Western European world. Perhaps they don't trust Putin neither. But this is what they know. And very many of these people haven't been in Western Europe until today, but they have visited Russia for a very simple reason, for a financial reason. They don't have enough money to travel to Western Europe, but it was possible for them to travel to Russia. It's not so far away. And factor of knowing somebody or something, a country, people, leader, was very important for this perception of a conflict and for the factor to support this or this country. The factor of familiarity with the West or familiarity with the East.
Yeah, that's true. So we have to notice that in Sweden there are some reflections in joining the NATO. And Russia threatened Sweden not to join the NATO. But that's a symbol that these small, free, deeply social democratized countries are a threat of this very mighty and brutal Russia. That's one of the problems. They want to live their free life and they feel threatened by what has happened in the Ukraine. But you are surely right that there are different impressions, notions in all these countries. In the Eastern European countries as well as in the Baltic countries, they admire strong leaders, for example. That's of course not the case in Western Europe and neither in Northern Europe. But on the other hand, I think the fear of being confronted with Russian aggression is very strong in Eastern countries because they remind their fate during 40 years after 1945 to 1990. That's its memory, in their very vivid memory. And of course, they don't share this memory with Western Europeans.
So we can say that historical experiences have been very important for the present actual perception of Russia, Ukraine and Ukrainian-Russian conflict. Coming back to a question whether this has been one factor or a different, we can say, sure, very, very many different factors, but it's even not possible to say that we have very clear Western and Eastern perceptions. I mentioned before, the Finnish perception is very different from the Polish one, even if Finland, Poland, and Baltic countries too have a very similar experience with the Russian past. But there's different way of acting, different way of reactions, and proposals how to react regarding neighbor. What I mentioned before, in the Polish policy, emotions are very important regarding reactions and proposals how to deal with the conflict, while Finland is much more tactic. And even if Finland remembers a very difficult past and a very difficult neighbor Soviet Union, Finland is much more and much more pragmatic and underlines we have to be cautious, we have to wait, we don't need aggressive reactions towards Russia, because if we react this way, if we support Ukraine too much, this could be dangerous not only for Finland but for European development. We can see how different reactions can be, even with the same, in countries with the same experience and the same past.
Well, they are not socialized in a real democratic way. And on the one hand side, they feel protected by such strong leaders. They want to give these strong leaders the responsibility of their life. But on the other hand, they know that this would be a proper loss of for them. So they are in between in the Eastern European countries. On the one hand side, they have got a tendency to have such strong leaders. So see, for example, Hungary. Hungary is on the road of such an authoritarian state, but on the other hand, they want to beware their liberty. In any case, their personal liberty. And that's the situation in the Eastern European countries, and that's different from Western European countries. For the notion of Western Europeans, like the Hungarian one, seems to us a little bit ridiculous. Dangerous, but also ridiculous. But this feeling of being ridiculous is not present in Eastern European minds. They admire only these strong men.
Because this is very easy to admire them, and because this gives them hope. There is somebody who has much more power in order to decide about our life, and everything can be easier for us. Data has shown that the reason why people voted for Putin, Orban, in Poland, Kaczynski in former times, one very important reason was that they believed everything will be easier for them, and another person with much more power can take all decisions and can decide, and very important, find a solution to the everyday problems.
So in the end, they will improve our life. That's the hope, the irrational hope. And they do not trust in parliament procedures. These procedures they take long time, and in the end they are ununderstandable for the grassroots. At the universities, sometimes our colleagues are very open-minded, but sometimes not. They are afraid of disadvantages for it, and they are very cautious sometimes too. So the mood, this dark mood of war and conflicts have influenced university talks too. So 10 years, or let's say 15 years ago, we talked more frankly way than today. And I think that's one of the problems. And most scholars don't want to decide for one or the other side. They want to stay in between for not being in any categories, pro or contra. And on the other hand, you have to draw decisions in the end of your scholarly work. You have to say pro and contra. And in this case, we say that Russia had been the aggressor in this conflict. But it's difficult, of course. In the Ukraine, we observe corruption and some provocative actions, even on the military sector too. So it's very difficult to say or to give advices how to end this conflict. But in the end, we have to conclude that Putin draws the lines.
And regarding the media, we have not been satisfied. We compared the media reports in Ukraine, in Russia, Poland, Germany, of course. And we have to say that in all these countries, most of media reports have been full of propaganda, depending on which side, whether media was from the left or from the right. It was difficult to find neutral information regarding the conflict. In many cases, there was a concrete statement behind, and even in Western European media, I analyze media in Germany, sometimes we had the impression that the conflict disappeared, that a solution was found to the conflict because the information in the media wasn't present anymore. And later on, we saw the conflict is has become
even
worse, but because of the influence of other conflicts like refugee, like Brexit. From the perspective of journalists, other conflicts became more important than the Ukrainian-Russian one, but in reality it was still present or even worse, and it was not possible to find a solution to this conflict, but not from the perspective of the media. So we can see that it was a division, it was a border between the conflict and development of the conflict itself on the one hand, and a perception, presentation in different media on the other hand.
We meet colleagues, very scholarly researcher, about 50, 55 years old, and they have to live with contracts only for 4 years. And that's why they feel insecure and be conscious.
So there's perhaps a different reason. They are not very secure, and the contracts will come into an end. This is a situation in some countries and for some scholars. But on the other hand, there are scholars with permanent contracts without this risk of losing their jobs, but they're afraid because of their career and because it could be risky for their image in the country, universities. So there's not only financial pressure and insecurity, but pressure because of the image.
Yeah.
And they're afraid how they would be perceived in the community and by the colleagues.
That's one of the reasons why they are very hesitant to draw clear conclusions.
And our influence is very important that we could have on the academic society. Perhaps you think, other people think, it's only a question of different generation. The young generation is much more open-minded and critical, and it's not always the case, because we teach at an international university in Flensburg in the German-Danish border region. And we have students from, about 50 different countries. And we have very many students from Ukraine and Russia too. And you wouldn't believe how very much afraid the students are and don't want to be critical, don't want to criticize the system. So you can see and experience that for young students there's the taboo about some topics too, and it's a new situation. Every time we are like, because we think that young people, yes, they are more able to criticize and to be, but it's not always the case. We experience this every year during our teaching.
They are of the opinion that they have to argue in a patriotic way and not in a scholarly way. And most of our time, we have to train them to step aside and to observe what is happening in their countries and to judge this from an independent point of view. That's very difficult for them. They are educated in such a way that they have to praise the circumstances in countries. And that's one of the main differences we are observing in the education between Eastern European students and Western European students. Western European students are very frankly in criticizing the circumstances in their countries. And they do that very frankly.
No, it was a very important event. This is what we noticed, that it was very much present for our Ukrainians in the mind. They went there, they were afraid because of their families. They were full of hopes. They thought now something will change in our country. Now we will become a democracy too, and now we will be closer to Western Europe. We discussed a lot in event, in Maidan event and other surrounding Maidan. And what we noticed that is a very much part of a student's daily life, and a lot of hopes were present, the hopes that later on disappeared. And after students became much more pessimistic, we can say, realistic, pessimistic, and started to criticize the events, Ukrainian government. They were disappointed. On the other hand, Russian students, our Russian students, were not very much supportive regarding Ukrainian events and didn't want to understand Ukrainian point of view, but started to support Putin even more, started to argue, now you can see Ukrainian chaos, and it hasn't really worked out, so the Russian way was the right one. And this is when we started discussion, no, it's not so easy. And let's start to analyze and not to argue with emotions. I was surprised that we have so many different results at the end. And one of our hypotheses was that we can distinguish between Western perceptions on the one hand, and Eastern European perceptions on the other hand. But one of our results is that there are very, very many different Eastern European perceptions, very many different Western European perceptions, and all this depends on their own experience, history, own expectations, and political situation right now. Has been one else. Another perhaps a very strong influence, that is what we haven't mentioned until now, of the Russian church that was involved in this conflict too.
Yeah, that's an important point, I think. The strong cooperation between the Russian Orthodox Church and Putin government is very surprising for a Western food, because, as you may know from the background of Canadians and North American experience in general, churches are very often critical, particularly the mainline churches, are very often critical against their governments That's not the case in Russia. There's a close cooperation. The Russian church supports all decisions Putin has made. Again, that is true with Ukraine as well as the fights in Syria. But on the other hand, and that's something we have to keep in mind as Westerners, in the eastern sphere of the world, Putin guarantees a certain amount of freedom and stability. That seems to be a paradox, but it's nevertheless true from the perspective of East. For example, the freedom of Muslim women in Central Asia. That's what surprised me a lot. They are of the opinion that the communist Russia freed themselves from the bonds of family and the notions of a woman need not be educated and so on and so on. They went to Moscow for studying there and felt for the first time free. And these experiences we didn't notice in the western part of Europe. But nevertheless, these feelings, these emotions are present until today, particularly in the sphere of Central Asia, in parts of Russia that are dominated by Muslim people. And that's had been very surprising for me because, I thought people would feel restricted, but that's not the case. So we have to be cautious. It depends from your experiences and from your observations of what you have learned in your life. And that's what Katarzyna underlined already. If you don't know Western lifestyle, but you have to decide for a poor life in the Ukraine or a better life in Russia, you have got the tendency to take Russia.
It's always very important to know the context, to know the situation, to know the historical development, to read from different perspectives and to read about different perceptions. And it's important in order to understand the situation to compare the life in the different countries, different style of life, to compare the different political situations, to ask, is it possible to really think in a free way, to react in a free way, or is it something that came from the top and perhaps the pressure has been important for this way of thinking and of acting. And because it's important to understand the different perceptions and to understand not on an official point of view, to understand the way of thinking, how do people think, how do they react, it's important to use different sources, to use unofficial sources, but and not only media sources, but to talk to people, to go there, to make interviews, to ask, to talk to people, to always to ask why did you react in this way? Why do you think in this way? It's important to try to understand people's perceptions, and these perceptions are very different.
Above all, this is cultural conflict too. We have to be aware that it is absolutely necessary to defend Western values and norms. And this conflict between Russia and Ukraine is only one example for this cultural conflict. these self-corrections are rare for different reasons. They're rare because you are in a definite set, you know. But talking to others, you feel embedded in your own setting. And so it's rather difficult to change your mind. But nevertheless, there are some corrections, but not along the main line. I don't think so.
It's a little bit easier with scholars, with young generation, with PhD students. We work very much not only with other professors, our colleagues, but perhaps we prefer working with students and PhD students. This is where we can influence a little bit the way of, we don't want to influence which way they should think, but what we want them to do is to think critically and to be open-minded, to be able to change their opinion and way of thinking. This is what we really want to make them free the way how do they think. And this is what mostly works. We always need time for discussions, time for arguments, time for dialogues. But in most cases, we can say, perhaps even in 80% of cases, that it really works, that we have arrived this goal that people try to think critically and perhaps they try to have thoughts regarding the former thesis and they start to open themselves and try to ask themselves, am I really right? Or perhaps it's not really the truth, because when we have truths, we have different perceptions and different way of thinking, and we have to find good solutions how to solve conflicts. I think it's our goal too, as scholars, to try to find solutions for solving conflicts and solving wars and other conflicts. It's our goal too. And in order to do it, we have to be critical, open-minded, and we have to analyze the situation, to work together, to ask questions, and to try to find a way to solve the conflict. Thank you very much, Jo. Thanks a lot for your engagement, for your time, and for the interview. This is what we enjoy a lot, to be with you and to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.